My name is Florence, and I just turned 61 last month. After 45 years of marriage, my husband Richard walked out on me for his secretary, who is half my age. I dedicated my entire adult life to supporting his legal career, raising our children, and being the perfect wife. When he left, he told me I had no skills and no future without him. Little did he know my secret investment was finally maturing. Before I tell you how my life fell apart and then came back together, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button to join me for more stories of resilience. I met Richard during my sophomore year at Northwestern University in 1978. I was studying literature with dreams of becoming a professor someday, while he was a focused pre-law student with ambitions of joining one of Chicago's top firms. Our first meeting happened in the university library, where I accidentally knocked over his carefully organized stack of constitutional law books. Instead of being annoyed, he smiled and asked if I would make it up to him by joining him for coffee. That coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into a whirlwind romance that swept me off my feet. Richard was charming, brilliant, and had his entire future mapped out. When he looked at me with those intense blue eyes and talked about building a life together, I believed every word. We married the summer after graduation, just before Richard started law school. Those early years were tough, but full of love and shared dreams. While Richard threw himself into his studies, I took on multiple jobs to support us. I worked as a teaching assistant during the day and waited tables at night. Our tiny apartment near campus became my sanctuary during those rare moments when I wasn't working or Richard wasn't studying. "When I make partner, this will all be worth it," Richard would say, kissing my forehead as he found me asleep among stacks of papers I had been grading. "You are investing in our future, Florence." The law school years tested us with long separations, financial stress, and postponed dreams. I had been accepted into a prestigious graduate program for literature, but we jointly decided that I would defer my admission. Richard needed to focus entirely on excelling in law school, and we simply couldn't afford for both of us to be students. "It's just temporary," I told myself. "I can pursue my doctorate after Richard establishes his career." That temporary pause became permanent when I discovered I was pregnant with our first child, James, during Richard's final year of law school. Sophia followed 2 years later. By then, Richard had secured a position as a junior associate at Patterson-Williams and Burke, one of Chicago's most prestigious corporate law firms. With Richard working 80-hour weeks and barely home, the burden of raising our children fell entirely to me. When I broached the subject of hiring help so I could take a few courses, Richard was dismissive. "The children need their mother, Florence. My colleagues' wives all stay home. It reflects poorly on me if you're not fully committed to our family." So I poured myself into creating the perfect home and raising our children. I volunteered at their schools, chaired fundraisers, and organized community events. I managed our social calendar and hosted dinner parties for Richard's colleagues and clients. I supported Richard in every possible way, believing that his success was our success. As Richard climbed the corporate ladder, we moved to an exclusive neighborhood in the North Shore. Our house was beautiful, with 5 bedrooms, a swimming pool, and a meticulously landscaped garden that I maintained myself. From the outside, our life looked perfect. But as the years passed, I noticed Richard growing more distant. His rare appearances at home were often punctuated with critical comments about the house, the children, or me. Nothing was ever quite good enough. The dinners I prepared were too heavy or too light. The children were too loud or too shy. I was too casual or too formal for the occasion. By the time James and Sophia were in high school, Richard and I were like polite strangers sharing a home. When I attempted to discuss returning to school or finding part-time work, he would sigh impatiently. "What would you even do, Florence? Your skills are outdated. Besides, we don't need the money, and I need you available for business events." I accepted his assessment of my worth, believing that my contributions to our family weren't valuable in the real world. That changed when my Aunt Lillian passed away, leaving me a surprising inheritance of $75,000. "You were always her favorite," my mother said at the funeral. She always said you gave up too much of yourself for that husband of yours. For reasons I didn't fully understand then, I decided not to tell Richard about the inheritance. Instead, I reached out to my college friend Diane, who had become a financial advisor. Over lunch, I confessed my feelings of financial dependence and fear for my future. Richard's right that I have no real skills after all these years, I said, stirring my coffee nervously. Diane reached across the table and gripped my hand. That's nonsense, Florence. You've been managing a household budget, raising children, and organizing complex social events for decades. Those are valuable skills, but more importantly, you need some financial independence. With Diane's guidance, I invested my inheritance in a small tech startup that she believed had potential. It was 1998, and the tech industry was booming. This is a long-term investment, Diane warned. Don't expect returns for many years, if at all. But if it succeeds, it could change your life. Little did I know how prophetic her words would be. As Richard rose to senior partner status, our lifestyle became increasingly luxurious. We traveled first class to exotic locations, though Richard spent most vacations on his phone with clients. Our home was featured in a regional architectural magazine, and I was expected to maintain its perfect appearance for impromptu client visits and firm parties. My role as the corporate wife expanded. I organized charity galas that Richard's firm sponsored, selected appropriate gifts for clients' spouses, and maintained the extensive social network that supported Richard's business relationships. I became skilled at remembering personal details about everyone in Richard's professional circle, a talent he utilized but never acknowledged. Just make sure everything runs smoothly, he would instruct before important events, without recognizing the weeks of planning I had invested. Despite being constantly surrounded by people, I felt increasingly isolated. The other partners' wives were friendly but competitive, comparing vacation homes and children's college acceptances. None of them seemed to share my quiet dissatisfaction or fading sense of identity. When James left for Stanford and Sophia for Columbia, our empty nest echoed with silence. I thought Richard and I might reconnect, perhaps travel together, or rediscover shared interests. Instead, he expanded his work hours and joined 2 additional corporate boards. This is the most critical time in my career, Florence, he explained when I suggested a weekend getaway. I can finally pursue opportunities I sacrificed while the kids were growing up. I swallowed my disappointment and focused on finding new purpose. I expanded my volunteer work at a local women's shelter, helping women rebuild their lives after leaving abusive relationships. Many of these women shared stories of emotional neglect and financial control that resonated uncomfortably with my own experience, though I wasn't ready to acknowledge the parallels. It was during this period that Richard hired Natalie as his new executive assistant. She was 32 with a business degree and impeccable style. When Richard brought her home for our annual Christmas party, I went out of my way to make her feel welcome, remembering my own discomfort at such events as a newcomer. "You have such a beautiful home, Mrs. Harrington," Natalie gushed, accepting a glass of wine. "Richard talks about you constantly at the office." I smiled, wondering what exactly Richard said about his increasingly invisible wife. I couldn't remember the last time we had a meaningful conversation that wasn't about household logistics or social obligations. My friendship with Diane deepened during this period. Unlike my society acquaintances, Diane spoke frankly about money, power, and independence. During our monthly lunches, she updated me on my investment, which was holding steady but not yet profitable. "The company is developing innovative security software," she explained. "They're playing the long game, reinvesting, rather than taking quick profits." When I mentioned wanting to join the board of Richard's firm's charitable foundation, she encouraged me enthusiastically. "That's perfect for you, Florence. You've been running their events for years anyway." But when I raised the idea with Richard, he immediately shot it down. "Those positions are for major donors and people with relevant professional experience," he said dismissively. "You wouldn't understand the financial discussions." His rejection stung, but it also sparked something new in me, defiance. The next day, I used some of my modest personal savings to enroll in online business courses through a continuing education program. I didn't tell Richard scheduling my studies during his frequent absences. As my confidence in my learning abilities grew, Richard's criticism of me intensified. He commented on my appearance at dinner parties, suggesting I looked matronly compared to the younger wives. He questioned my opinions on current events, often cutting me off mid-sentence to correct me. When I shared insights from my business courses disguised as something I had read in a magazine, he would sigh impatiently. "Florence, you're simplifying complex concepts you don't understand." Richard's work trips became more frequent, often extended at the last minute. He bought a new wardrobe, started working out with a personal trainer, and became oddly protective of his phone. I found myself alone for weeks at a time, managing our home and social obligations, while he was supposedly closing important deals across the country or overseas. One evening, while searching for a receipt in Richard's home office, I discovered a text notification on his iPad that he had accidentally left open. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear the necklace I gave you. Love, N." My hands trembled as I set down the device. A cold weight settled in my stomach, but I quickly rationalized it. N could be a client with the initial N. The necklace could be a corporate gift. I was overreacting, letting my insecurities color an innocent message. I didn't confront Richard when he returned from that trip. Instead, I greeted him with a home-cooked meal and updates about the charity gala I was organizing. He barely looked up from his phone during dinner, and when I asked about his trip, he provided vague, rehearsed answers before retreating to his office. That night, lying awake beside his sleeping form, I realized how much distance had grown between us. I resolved to fight for our marriage, believing that 40 years of history deserved at least that effort. I had no idea that I was already fighting a battle I had lost long ago. For our 45th anniversary, I planned a surprise trip to Tuscany, where we had spent our 20th anniversary during happier times. I spent months organizing every detail, coordinating with Richard's assistant to clear his schedule, and arranging for our children to meet us there for a family celebration. I hoped the romantic setting and family connection might rekindle what we had lost. 2 weeks before our departure, while gathering Richard's passport information, I noticed unusual charges on our shared credit card statement. There were multiple charges from Tiffany & Company and expensive restaurants in Chicago on days Richard had told me he was in New York or Washington. Most disturbing was the charge for a weekend at the Peninsula Hotel in Chicago, just 15 minutes from our home. My hands shook as I printed the statements and laid them on our bed. When Richard came home, I asked him directly about the charges. "These must be mistakes," he said smoothly, barely glancing at the papers. "I'll have my assistant dispute them tomorrow." "Richard, these aren't mistakes. You were in Chicago when you told me you were in New York. You bought jewelry I never received. You stayed at a hotel minutes from our home." His face hardened as he realized I wasn't going to accept his deflection. "I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own home, Florence. And I don't appreciate being lied to after 45 years of marriage." I countered, my voice surprisingly steady despite my pounding heart. The silence between us stretched until finally Richard sat heavily on the edge of our bed. "I didn't want to have this conversation now," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I've been seeing someone else. It's serious and I want a divorce." Though I had suspected an affair, hearing the words knocked the breath from my lungs. "Who is she?" "That's not important right now," he said, but his refusal to meet my gaze told me everything. "It's Natalie, isn't it?" His silence confirmed my suspicion. I thought of how I had welcomed her into our home, offered her friendship, while all along she had been stealing my husband. "How long?" I asked, needing to know how extensive the betrayal had been. 2 years, he admitted. "But our marriage has been over much longer than that, Florence. We both know that." "I didn't know that," I whispered. "I've been trying to save our marriage while you've been destroying it." Richard finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of impatience and what seemed like pity. "Be realistic, Florence. What would your life be without me? You have no career, no skills that translate to the real world. You've been a housewife for 40 years. No one is going to hire you at 61. His words cut deeper than the affair itself. So I should just accept your betrayal because I'm dependent on you. I'm trying to be pragmatic. You have no future without me. I built everything we have. The house, the lifestyle, our social standing, it all came from my hard work. Our hard work? I corrected. I supported you every step of the way. Richard laughed, a cold sound that I had never heard from him before. Planning parties and decorating the house is hardly equivalent to building a legal career. Let's not pretend your contributions were equal. In that moment, I realized the man I had loved for most of my life had never truly seen me or valued what I had sacrificed for him. The following weeks were a blur of pain and practical horrors. Richard moved out immediately, taking only his clothes and personal items. He hired the city's most aggressive divorce attorney and initiated proceedings designed to overwhelm me. I learned that Richard had been planning his exit for years, systematically hiding assets and building a case to minimize his financial obligations to me. Despite having practiced law for decades, Richard somehow claimed that our prenuptial agreement signed when we were both just out of college and I was the primary breadwinner should limit my claim to our marital assets. He froze. Our joint accounts canceled my credit cards and claimed that the house was primarily his property since he had paid the mortgage. Within a month, his legal maneuvers forced me to move out of our family home into a small apartment that he generously paid for while the divorce proceeded. The space was clean but soulless, with rented furniture and bare walls that reflected my sudden identity loss. Our children reacted to the divorce with divided loyalties. James, who had always idolized his father, accepted Richard's version of events without question. Dad says you grew apart naturally, that you refused couples counseling, he said during an uncomfortable dinner at my new apartment. He says he tried for years to make it work. Sophia was more suspicious of her father's narrative and more supportive of me. Did he really expect you to just accept his affair? She asked indignantly. After everything you did for his career, the divorce became my full-time job as I scrambled to understand our complicated finances and respond to Richard's legal tactics. I sank into depression, questioning every choice I had made and every sacrifice I had justified over the years. I lost weight, struggled to sleep, and began to believe Richard's assessment that I had no value beyond being his wife. The turning point came when I ran into my college roommate Teresa at the grocery store. She was shocked by my appearance and insisted on taking me to lunch. "You need a better lawyer," she said after hearing an abbreviated version of my situation. "Richard is using his connections to steamroll you." Teresa connected me with Barbara Sullivan, a divorce attorney known for taking on powerful men who tried to discard their long-term wives. At our first meeting, Barbara's directness was both jarring and comforting. "Your husband is playing dirty," she said, reviewing the initial filings. "He's hidden assets, minimized your contributions, and is using his legal network to intimidate you. But he's made mistakes that we can leverage." With Barbara's guidance, I began fighting back. We discovered offshore accounts Richard had established years ago and identified several properties purchased through shell companies. Most significantly, Barbara challenged the validity of the prenuptial agreement based on its age and the changed circumstances of our marriage. "A 45-year marriage with significant career sacrifices on your part invalidates the original assumptions of that agreement," she explained. "No judge will see this as a simple contract matter." The legal battle became brutal. Richard's attorneys deposed our friends, questioned my mental stability, and even suggested I had been unfaithful early in our marriage. During one courthouse encounter, I overheard Richard telling his attorney, "She's nothing without me. She'll crumble before this is over." His words, intended to hurt, instead hardened my resolve to prove him wrong. As the divorce proceedings dragged into their 6th month, my financial situation became increasingly dire. Richard had successfully argued for minimal temporary support, claiming that the apartment and small stipend he provided were sufficient for my reduced circumstances. Each month became a careful calculation of priorities. I sold my designer handbags and much of my jewelry to cover legal fees. I learned to shop at discount grocery stores and canceled the salon appointments that had been part of my routine for decades. The emotional toll was even heavier than the financial one. One evening, I saw Richard and Natalie dining at Giovanni's, the Italian restaurant, where we had celebrated our anniversaries for 20 years. They were laughing, sharing a bottle of wine, his hand casually resting on hers across the table. I stood frozen on the sidewalk watching through the window as my replacement enjoyed the life I had helped build. I walked home in a daze and spent the night on my bathroom floor sobbing until I had no tears left. For the first time, I seriously questioned whether fighting for a fair settlement was worth the pain. Perhaps I should accept whatever Richard offered just to end this nightmare. The next morning, still red-eyed and exhausted, I received an unexpected call from Diane. "We need to meet immediately," she said, her voice vibrating with excitement. "Not over the phone. Can you come to my office today?" 3 hours later, I sat across from Diane as she spread documents across her desk. "Your tech investment," she began, her smile wide. "The security software company you invested in 20 years ago has just received a major acquisition offer. They're preparing for an IPO instead, and as an early investor, your shares are about to become extremely valuable." I stared at the projections she laid before me, struggling to comprehend the numbers. How valuable? Conservative estimates put your $75,000 investment at a current value of just over $11 million. After the IPO, it could be worth twice that. The room seemed to tilt slightly. $11 million? Diane nodded enthusiastically. This company develops security software that's now used by the major financial institutions worldwide. They've been quietly growing for years, reinvesting profits rather than paying dividends. That patience is about to pay off spectacularly. As the shock wore off, a critical question emerged. "Does Richard know about this?" "No," Diane assured me. "The investment is solely in your name using your inheritance. It's not marital property. And given the timing, if we handle this correctly, it could remain separate from the divorce proceedings entirely." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. What do I need to do? First, absolutely nothing changes in your current position. You continue to appear financially dependent. Second, we need to keep this information completely confidential until after the divorce is finalized. With Diane's guidance, I contacted a separate financial team and legal advisor to handle the investment matters, ensuring complete separation from my divorce case. I learned that the company's Secure Tech Systems was planning its IPO announcement within 3 months, potentially coinciding with the projected conclusion of my divorce. This knowledge became my secret strength during the darkest days of the legal battle. When Richard's attorneys questioned my ability to support myself, I nodded meekly while inwardly calculating my future independence. When Richard flaunted his relationship with Natalie at social events, I focused on planning the education and career opportunities I would pursue once I was free. I joined a support group for divorced women over 50, where I met Margaret Thompson, a 65-year-old former homemaker who had rebuilt her life after a similar betrayal. "I went to law school at 57, she told me during a coffee meetup. "Now I specialize in helping women navigate late-life divorces. The best revenge is creating a life your ex-husband can't imagine you capable of building." Margaret became both friend and mentor, encouraging me to rediscover my strengths. Under her guidance, I began volunteering at a local business incubator, helping startups organize their administrative systems and develop communication materials. My years of managing complex households and social events translated surprisingly well to office management and event planning. I also joined a book club focused on contemporary literature, reconnecting with my original passion for literary analysis. The intellectual stimulation awakened parts of my mind that had been dormant for decades, reminding me of the academic path I had abandoned. Throughout this period, I maintained the appearance of financial struggle. I took the bus instead of taxis, wore the same outfits to court appearances, and continued to live in the modest apartment Richard provided. His lawyers, noting my apparent financial desperation, began pushing for a quick settlement. Your client should consider herself lucky we're offering anything beyond the prenuptial terms, Richard's attorney told Barbara during a mediation session. Mr. Harrington built this fortune through his own efforts. Barbara, who now understood my full financial situation, smiled tightly. My client contributed 45 years to that fortune. We'll continue with the full discovery process unless your offer improves substantially. After 8 exhausting months, Richard finally agreed to a settlement that included a modest cash payment, continued health insurance, and a small portion of his retirement funds. The amount was far less than my legal entitlement after such a long marriage, but with my secret investment pending, I instructed Barbara to accept the terms rather than prolong the fight. The day I signed the final divorce papers, Richard watched me with barely concealed satisfaction, clearly believing he had won. As we left the courthouse, he actually said, "I hope you'll be able to manage on your own, Florence. It's not too late to reconsider the settlement if you're worried." I looked at my ex-husband, this stranger I had spent most of my life with, and replied simply, "I'll be just fine, Richard. Better than you might expect." He laughed as he walked away, taking my comment an empty bravado rather than the promise it truly was. In the weeks following my divorce, I worked closely with Diane to understand the full potential of my investment and prepare for the changes ahead. Secure Tech Systems had grown from a small startup into a major player in the cybersecurity industry, with clients including international banks, government agencies, and Fortune 500 companies. "Your timing was incredibly fortunate," Diane explained during one of our strategy sessions. "You invested just before the dot-com crash, but this company survived because of its focus on security rather than consumer applications." As I studied the company's history and financial reports, I made a startling discovery. Richard's law firm, Patterson, Williams & Burke, was representing Megatech Corporation in their attempt to acquire a controlling interest in Secure Tech. "This can't be coincidence," I told Diane, showing her the connection. "Richard's firm handles major acquisitions. They must be representing the buyer." Diane confirmed my suspicion after some discreet inquiries. Megatech wants to acquire SecureTech's technology and client list. They're offering to buy out existing shareholders at a premium, but still significantly below the potential IPO value. We learned that Megatech's strategy required acquiring at least 51% ownership before the planned IPO. As an early investor, my shares represented nearly 23% of the company, making me the second largest individual shareholder after the founder. If I don't sell, they can't get controlling interest, I realized. Exactly, Diane confirmed. And Richard's firm stands to make millions in fees if the acquisition succeeds. This revelation transformed my understanding of the situation. My investment wasn't just my financial salvation. It potentially gave me leverage over the very institution that had defined Richard's career and identity. I enrolled in additional business classes, focusing on corporate governance and investment strategy. Each evening, I studied financial terminology and corporate law basics, preparing myself for decisions I never imagined making. For the first time in decades, I felt my mind expanding beyond the constraints Richard had gradually imposed. With Diane's help, I assembled a team of financial advisors and corporate attorneys who specialized in representing individual investors. We developed a comprehensive strategy for managing my shares and potential board involvement after the IPO. When SecureTech announced its planned public offering, the financial press reported a mystery investor who controlled enough shares to potentially block Megatech's acquisition attempt. Richard would never connect this news to his seemingly struggling ex-wife. 2 days after the announcement, I received a call from Alexander Jensen, SecureTech's founder and CEO. "Mrs. Harrington," he began, "as one of our earliest and most significant investors, we'd like to discuss your position regarding our upcoming IPO and the competing acquisition offer." I had prepared for this conversation, rehearsing with my advisors to ensure I appeared knowledgeable and confident. "I believe in SecureTech's independent future," I told him. "Your technology deserves to develop under leadership that understands its potential not as a subsidiary of a larger corporation with different priorities. Alexander seemed pleasantly surprised by my grasp of the situation. Many of our investors are simply looking for the quickest profit. It's refreshing to find someone with a longer vision. Our conversation led to an invitation to meet with the executive team and discuss a potential seat on the post-IPO board of directors. My significant ownership stake combined with my opposition to the acquisition made me a valuable ally to the current management. As these business developments unfolded, I began transforming my apartment into a functional home office. I purchased a professional wardrobe quite different from the designer clothes of my corporate wife, days opting instead for well-tailored suits and comfortable yet elegant separates appropriate for business meetings. My relationship with my children also evolved during this period. Sophia, who had supported me throughout the divorce, became even closer as she saw me rebuilding my life. She helped me furnish my apartment and accompanied me shopping for my new professional wardrobe. "Mom, I'm so proud of you," she said as we shared dinner one evening. "Dad always made it seem like you couldn't survive without him, but look at you now." More surprisingly, James began to reach out after months of siding with his father. Our reconciliation started with an awkward lunch where he finally asked for my perspective on the divorce. "Dad said some things about you that don't match the mother I grew up with," he admitted. "And he's different with Natalie than he was with you, more controlling." By the time the divorce was finalized, I had developed a clear vision for my future that extended far beyond financial security. My friendship with Margaret deepened into a business mentorship as she guided me through the transition from homemaker to businesswoman. "The hardest part is believing you deserve a seat at the table," she advised. "Once you overcome that doubt, the practical challenges become manageable." As the IPO date approached, I continued to maintain my modest lifestyle, giving Richard no reason to suspect my changing circumstances. The final divorce decree was signed on a Tuesday. The major shareholder meeting to vote on the Megatech acquisition offer was scheduled for the following Monday, perfectly timed for my emergence from Richard's shadow. The morning of the shareholder meeting arrived with perfect dramatic timing, exactly 1 week after my divorce became final. After 45 years of marriage and nearly a year of brutal divorce proceedings, I was legally and emotionally free to step into my new identity. I awoke early and followed the preparation routine I had practiced with my team. My hair, recently cut into a sophisticated bob, was styled professionally. My makeup was subtle but polished. I wore a navy blue Armani suit selected for its understated elegance rather than flash, with a simple pearl necklace that had been my grandmother's. As my driver approached the gleaming downtown office tower where the meeting would take place, I felt surprisingly calm. The months of preparation, study, and strategic planning had built my confidence in ways I never anticipated. My team waited in the lobby, Diane among them all offering encouraging smiles as I arrived. "Ready to change your life?" Diane asked, squeezing my hand. "Ready to claim it," I corrected. We took the elevator to the 40th floor conference room where the meeting would be held. Through the glass doors, I could see the gathering of executives, lawyers, and major investors. My heart jumped when I spotted Richard seated near the head of the table, looking confident, in his bespoke suit, legal documents spread before him. He hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I watched him laughing with another attorney, clearly anticipating a successful meeting. He had no idea his world was about to shift. Alexander Jensen greeted me warmly at the door. "Mrs. Harrington, we're delighted you could join us for this critical discussion." I smiled, aware that Richard had frozen mid-conversation at the sound of my name. Slowly, he turned toward the entrance, his expression transforming from confusion to disbelief as he recognized me. "Florence," he said, rising halfway from his chair, "what are you doing here?" I approached the table calmly. "Hello, Richard. I'm surprised to see you as well, though perhaps I shouldn't be." Alexander looked between us. "You know each other. Richard is my ex-husband," I explained smoothly. "Our divorce was finalized just last week." Richard's face flushed as he struggled to process my presence. There must be some mistake. My ex-wife has no connection to SecureTech. Alexander placed a hand on my shoulder. On the contrary, Mrs. Harrington has been one of our most significant investors for over 20 years. In fact, she currently controls 23% of the company, making her our second largest shareholder. The blood drained from Richard's face as he finally understood the implications. His firm's client Megatech needed at least 51% ownership to gain control. With the founder holding 27% and me holding 23%, if we aligned our interests, the acquisition could not proceed without our support. This is inappropriate, Richard sputtered, looking to his colleagues for support. There's a clear conflict of interest given our recent divorce proceedings. Alexander remained professional but firm. The timing is certainly interesting, but Mrs. Harrington's investment predates your firm's involvement with Megatech by many years. Her shareholder rights are fully established and documented. The meeting proceeded with excruciating formality. I took my assigned seat across from Richard, maintaining composed professionalism despite his constant glares. When it came time for shareholder statements, I presented the alternative business strategy I had developed with my advisors. SecureTech has flourished as an independent company focused on cutting-edge security solutions. I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Being absorbed into Megatech's corporate structure risked diluting that focus and eventually losing the innovative edge that makes this company valuable in the first place. I outlined a strategy for continued independence with strategic partnerships rather than acquisition, emphasizing the potential for greater long-term growth and value creation. I had studied the company thoroughly and spoke with authority about its technology market position and future potential. The board members listened attentively, several nodding in agreement with my points. Richard, visibly seething, interrupted several times with increasingly desperate objections. Mrs. Harrington has no business experience either, he argued. Her assessment lacks professional foundation. Alexander responded diplomatically. We value input from all our major shareholders, regardless of their background. Mrs. Harrington's analysis aligns with several independent evaluations we've commissioned. When Richard realized he was losing ground, he made a final personal attack. Florence has always been financially naive. She required my guidance for basic household budgeting throughout our marriage. The room fell uncomfortably silent at this inappropriate comment. I met Richard's gaze directly. On the contrary, I replied calmly, I managed our family finances quite successfully for 45 years, including during the early years when I supported your law school education. I've simply applied those same skills on a larger scale. The vote when it came was decisive. The board recommended rejecting Megatech's offer in favor of proceeding with the IPO as an independent company. As majority shareholders, Alexander and I confirmed our support for this direction, effectively ending any possibility of the acquisition succeeding. Richard's firm had lost a multi-million-dollar deal, and he had been publicly embarrassed in front of important clients. As the meeting concluded, he stormed toward me, his face contorted with anger. You deliberately concealed this asset during our divorce, he hissed. I'll have the settlement reopened immediately. I smiled, feeling genuinely sorry for him despite everything. The investment was made with my inheritance properly documented as separate property and disclosed in my financial statements. Your attorney simply didn't recognize its potential value, much as you never recognized mine. As he sputtered threats, Alexander approached to escort me to a celebratory lunch with the board. Is everything all right, Florence? He asked, eyeing Richard cautiously. Everything is perfect, I replied. Then turning to Richard one last time, I added quietly, it seems I did have skills after all. As I walked away with my new colleagues, I felt the weight of Richard's stunned gaze. For the first time in our relationship, he was seeing me clearly, not as an extension of himself, but as an independent woman with capabilities he had never bothered to acknowledge. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly completely free. The year following the shareholder meeting brought changes I could never have imagined during my married life. SecureTech's successful IPO multiplied the value of my investment beyond even the most optimistic projections. Overnight, I went from Richard's discarded wife to a wealthy woman in my own right, with financial security that exceeded anything he had provided. True to the board's invitation, I accepted a position as a non-executive director, attending quarterly meetings and serving on the compensation committee. My perspective as a major shareholder who valued long-term stability over quick profits proved valuable during the company's transition to public trading. With my newfound financial independence, I purchased a beautiful 3-bedroom condominium in a historic building downtown. Unlike our suburban mansion which Richard had chosen, and I had maintained, this home truly reflected my personal taste and priorities. I filled it with comfortable furniture, books I had always wanted to read, and art that spoke to me rather than impressed guests. The most meaningful use of my resources, however, was establishing the Second Chapter Foundation, which provided scholarships and mentoring for women returning to education midlife. Many of these women were divorced or widowed after decades of marriage, facing the same fears and self-doubt I had experienced. "Your story gives me hope," one scholarship recipient told me at our first annual fundraiser. "I was married for 32 years before my husband left. I thought my life was over, but now I'm studying nursing at 56. My relationships with both children evolved in positive ways after the dust settled. Sophia, always my supporter, became my confidant and friend as we adjusted to our new family dynamic. James required more time to process the dramatic shifts in his perception of both parents. After several months of uncomfortable encounters, he finally asked to meet for dinner at a neutral restaurant. "I owe you an apology," he said as soon as we were seated. "I believe Dad's version of events without question. I judged you unfairly." "You were caught in an impossible situation," I assured him. "No child should have to choose between parents." "But I did choose," he admitted. "I assumed Dad must be right because he was the successful one, the one who knew about business and money. I never questioned that narrative." His humility touched me deeply. "We all accepted that narrative, James. I believed it myself for most of my marriage." Our relationship gradually healed as James recognized the subtle patterns of dismissal and control that had shaped our family dynamics. He even began bringing his children to visit me regularly, allowing me to develop the grandmother relationship Richard had nearly destroyed. Beyond family, I discovered the joy of authentic friendships based on mutual respect rather than social obligation. Margaret remained my closest confidant, but I also connected with fellow board members, women from my business classes, and volunteers at the foundation. For the first time in decades, my social circle consisted of people who knew me as Florence, not as Richard's wife. 6 months after the IPO, I finally took the step I had deferred for over 40 years. I enrolled in a master's program in English literature, attending evening classes twice weekly. The joy of engaging with great books in an academic setting rekindled my earliest passions and connected me with students of all ages who shared my intellectual curiosity. I even began cautiously dating, accepting occasional dinners with a retired professor I met in my literature program. Thomas was kind, intellectually engaging, and notably respectful of my independence, never assuming he knew better than I did about any subject. Nearly a year after the shareholder meeting, I encountered Richard and Natalie at an art gallery opening. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that Richard's professional standing had suffered after losing the SecureTech deal. Several important clients had questioned his judgment, and his firm had reduced his role in major acquisitions. Natalie looked significantly less enamored than she had during their affair, her smile tight as she clung to Richard's arm. Richard himself appeared older, the confident swagger replaced by a defensive stiffness. When he spotted me across the room, he visibly tensed, clearly dreading an encounter. I simply nodded politely and continued my conversation with the gallery owner. I felt no desire for confrontation or revenge, having moved beyond the need for either. My success was not about proving Richard wrong, but about discovering my own capabilities. Later that evening, as Thomas and I walked along the lakefront, He asked about my brief interaction with Richard. There seemed to be quite a history there, he observed. Was it difficult seeing him? I considered the question carefully. Not in the way it once would have been. I realized tonight that I'm genuinely thankful for what happened. Thankful? Thomas looked surprised. If Richard hadn't left me, I might never have discovered my own strength. I might have spent my entire life in his shadow, believing his assessment of my worth. His betrayal forced me to find myself. The wisdom of that realization continues to guide me. Life's greatest challenges often contain hidden opportunities for growth and reinvention. The end of my marriage, which once seemed like the ultimate failure, became the foundation for a more authentic and fulfilling life. Today, as I divide my time between the foundation, my board responsibilities, my studies, and my growing family of friends, I recognize that happiness comes not from external validation, but from living according to your own values and developing your own abilities. I no longer define myself in relation to Richard or any other person. At 61, I finally discovered who Florence truly is, and I like her very much. Have you ever had to reinvent yourself after a major life change? Did you discover strengths you never knew you had? Share your story in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation. Remember, it's never too late to write your next chapter. Thank you for joining me today, and may you find the courage to embrace your own power, especially when others doubt it.